Hi, my name is Chжan, and today we're going to speak about CLIL assessment. At the end of this lecture, you will be able to do some things. So these are, you will be able to understand the difference between CLIL assessment and regular assessment, reveal the disadvantage of regular tests in CLIL assessment, identify the type of CLIL assessment depending on what they assess, language or content, and what type of measurements are used. You will be able to remember the three principles and three common situations of CLIL assessment. Select assessment materials and define assessment criteria. Design assessment tasks or identify among the CLIL activities that could be used as assessment materials. And you will also be able to differentiate between the forms of assessment in CLIL. First of all, let's see needs analysis. In other words, it means why we're going to study this problem, this area in CLIL. There are several reasons for that. First of all, there is still a lack of official regulations for the assessment of learners' attainment in CLIL teaching. In addition to this, most teachers, researchers, and course book writers working with CLIL come from a foreign language teaching background and are typically not trained in the respective content, subjects, assessment, and teaching practices. Because of this, the majority of the few available teaching materials in CLIL primarily focus on teaching and assessing language competencies and not on the content of CLIL lessons. So, evaluating students' content learning is often neglected. However, the same lack of attention to assessment of content holds true for theoretical publications on CLIL teaching methodology as well. Thus, we have identified four main problems why we have to speak about CLIL assessment. Having identified these needs, it becomes necessary to exemplify ways of assessing CLIL teaching learning outcomes with regard to both language and content. Assessment in CLIL teaching at pre-primary and primary level basically follows the principle for good assessment practice valid for teaching learners in any content. So there is not much difference between them. However, CLIL assessment differs from regular assessment in several ways. Firstly, due to the dual focus on language and content, CLIL assessment needs to account for the goals and objectives of two different subjects, including knowledge, competencies, skills, attitudes, and behavior for both language and content. The assessment system in CLIL varies where to assess language or content and what type of measurements used. Colombo and Furbush stated that the disadvantage of regular tests because they fail to assess various levels of English. They mainly focus on the content areas and don't assess language features. So this is the disadvantage of regular tests. So we cannot use them fully in CLIL. And as a result, they listed three principles of assessment. The first one is to measure deep comprehension of both the subject and the language. The second principle is to use various ways of measurement. And the third one, to match assessments with student performances. Devising assessment tasks and procedures that fit two different subjects involves many challenges, and one of the main challenges is the extent to which language and subject assessment are assessed at the same time and through the same tasks and activities. Where should they be integrated? The impact of the mode of integration on the assessment outcomes. So this is one of the most important questions in the area of CLIL assessment. Hönig states that content can be separated from language and be assessed independently by the same teacher or two teachers. Well, but other authors state that they should be assessed in an integrated way. According to CLIL Learner Assessment Project, there are three common situations in CLIL assessment. The first one, assessment that focuses more on subject knowledge and competence and less on the foreign language competence. The second, assessment focus on the communicative competence in English. And the third one is an integrated assessment of language and subject content. So the third one is called integrated, fully integrated CLIL approach, where students learn the content, subject, and the language simultaneously. When the teacher starts planning the CLIL lesson, he or she should consider the following assessment issues in relation to learner performance. The teacher should answer the questions why, what, how, and when he or she is going to assess learners. They should know exactly why he or she wants to assess them. There may be many reasons for that. For example, if they want to find out if their students are motivated, or they want to identify strengths or weak points in CLIL lesson planning, or they want to inform the students, their parents, or some other people about their results. So this is what the teacher should know at the stage of planning. Gardner states that CLIL assessment has to be multidimensional and use a variety of assessment materials. Also, the teacher should select the assessment strategies according to what they expect their students will be able to do at the end of the lesson. In other words, it's very important to understand and to connect the results of the lessons with the goals. Also, teachers should take into account different learning style and multiple intelligences of their students in order to prepare and select assessment materials and define assessment criteria. So if a teacher takes it into account that in his class there are students with different learning styles, of course he will design different assessment criteria for them, and he will choose different assessment materials for them. Well, as we can see from this table, it's always best to assess student learning in the context of daily classroom activities and not as separate events. CLIL assessment for as language learning and of content learning should account for both language and content subject objectives in an integrated way, namely understanding the topic of subject content, develop skills and competencies in the subject content area and English, and thirdly, develop communicative competencies in English about the content topic. Sometimes the question arises What should be the balance between these two areas? Well, the most commonly practiced is to attribute the same assessment percentage to both language and content, though sometimes content is given a higher assessment rate, well, up to 70% of the final mark. Well, to understand this issue, the teacher should think about assessment descriptors that integrate content and language. Maslow underlines that in order to do this, it's important to consider the common European framework of reference for languages. This is an international standard for describing language ability. It describes language ability on a 6-point scale from A1 for beginners up to C2 for those who have mastered a language. Then it's desirable to combine them with cognitive and discursive operators defined both for language and for the content subject area, such as identify, recognize, distinguish, observe, describe, measure, estimate, explain, and so on. Barbero identifies the can-do items on English proficiency that can be combined with content-specific descriptors. After defining learning objectives for language and content and defining assessment descriptors that integrate both, it's time to think about designing assessment tasks or identifying among the CLIL activities that can be used as assessment materials. It's necessary to pay attention to the fact that a class activity does not constitute an element of formative assessment as it is. It should be some recorded evidence. For example, worksheet completed by students, corrected by the teacher, and post-edited by students. In this case, this becomes a formative assessment material. Important place is given to self-assessment in CLIL. This is for students to understand their own progress in learning, identify weak points and strengths, and to choose some improvement strategies for them. As an examples of self-assessment, students can use reflexive learning journals or self-assessment sheets. We can use portfolio assessment successfully in CLIL. These can be test results, drawings, notes, projects. This can be an electronic portfolio. It's very useful for children, parents, teachers to understand the process and the progress of learning. In order assessment become successful, we can use not just one criteria, but a range of criteria. For this, we can design a rubric. What is rubric? A rubric is a grid listing the criteria to be assessed in rows, divided into columns for each grade. There are descriptors which quantify what the learner has to do to achieve the grade. Rubrics make clear for the students to understand what they need to do in each area of evaluation. And using rubrics, students can make a decision on where to focus their efforts. When learning outcomes are assessed separately and a clear distinction is made between language and subject, we speak about adjunct CLIL and dual focus CLIL. Sometimes they need coordination and working of language specialists and subject specialists. It may be joint planning, team teaching, and criteria and learning outcomes for both areas. In CLIL, we use different forms of assessment. It may be formative assessment, project-based continuous individual or class work, and summative assessment, oral or written exams. It may be self-assessment and peer assessment. Depending on the CLIL variety, assessment ranges from individual or separate assessment of language and content to joint or team assessment of language and content. At the end, students can get 2 separate grades or 1 joint grade. Ideally, the progress of students is also monitored and considered in the evaluation. So this is the list of references that you can read additionally in order to get extra information about assessment in CLIL.